All right, aloha yogis. Haunani here. I'm going to guide you through a quick tutorial. I hope it's quick, a tutorial about how to fall out. I know this came up in our last session and there have been some comments and requests to actually go over this. And I don't know if we'll have time to go over it in our live session. So I wanted to make sure that you had a resource to go to at your own time. So just for the time being, what I'd like us to do is, because we're not fully warmed up and we might be getting into some inversions, I am going to lead you through a kind of a warm up, but more moving through different basic, oh gosh, what would I even call these? Kind of like a developmental progression of movement as we do from birth to standing as our warm up. And the reason why I'm doing this is because what I found in other workshops I've done when I used to lead a lot of asana-based workshops, is that when we would go into inversions or when we do an inversion workshop, there would always be at least one person, sometimes more, people who there was more to it than just being afraid of going upside down. And a lot of it comes back to sometimes basic developmental movements, patterns that still don't feel safe. So what I've learned is if we move through these patterns, if we move through these different movement patterns and you find that you get triggered in some way, or you feel yourself tighten up and it doesn't feel comfortable to move through it, I want you to stop there first. And you won't necessarily do this like falling out of inversions workshop then, because I only want you to get into inversions if you're in a place of feeling safe, that you can find your foundation, you can keep your breath. Because if we can't regulate ourselves in our inversions, we shouldn't be there yet, right? We're not forcing anything in our practice. If it naturally arises and we have a foundation for it and our breath is there, let's progress. But if we move through these different movements and we find that we get our breath gets shortened and we feel a little anxious, let's stop at that space. You can watch the rest of the video and maybe come back to this video later on. Okay, so I'm going to start. What you'll need to do, let me move my mic forward a little bit. What I would like for you to do is, you might need to take your glasses off at some point, but what we're going to start with is just doing some basic movement on the ground. So almost like you were, I think these are called mountain climbers if you're standing up, but just doing your right arm reaches forward and your left knee will bend. And then we'll switch, right? So it's a cross crawl pattern, but we're not actually crawling, we're still on the floor. Okay, and you're breathing. All right. And now what we're gonna do is some kind of like I call them like tummy squirms, where you're just moving your hips kind of forward and back like this along the floor, and you're not necessarily moving yet. You can get your arms into it. And then I want you to begin to, what some people call army crawl or low crawl on the floor. See if you can add movement to it. You might move, think of how a baby moves on the floor, okay? And then what we're gonna do, again, if you begin to move in any of these ways and it just is like, you can tell you're like, you're working really hard for it, just stay there. Allow this movement to become more adaptive and slowly move into it rather than forcing on to the next place. Okay, if you're still with me, we're gonna move into, what do you call it? Like flipping over, rolling over. So face down, you might remove your sunglasses at this point, arms overhead. And I want you to just roll to one side onto your back. And then see if you can roll back on that same side. Okay, so we're gonna do this. Let's do this total of 5 times. Let's do it 3 times one side, and then we're gonna go to the other side. And then go to the other side. So remember, when we flip upside down, our perspective is changed. But in every asana, really, our perspective is changed. Our perspective changes. And so all of these patternings that we do help us to prepare our nervous system, help us to prepare our breath, in coordination with muscle and bone and the whole being to move as one big system. And each time it changes our perspective. So we're like building our body and our space to be upside down. Okay, so now we're gonna try to do a full roll. Okay, and see log rolling. If you have the space, you can keep going. You don't have to do just one. In my space, I can really only do about 1.5. So just do some log rolling in your space. Just like in all your practices, if you get dizzy or nauseous, please stop. And no judgment, right? We're just noticing what comes up. All right. Finding your breath again. We are going to move to crawling, okay? So go ahead and come into child's position, child's pose. And from here, come to all fours. Now we're going to integrate that cross crawl pattern, okay? And for some of you, this, if you don't do it a lot, if you're not on the floor a lot already with little ones or with your pets, it can feel incredibly weird and different. I remember teaching someone how to crawl for the first time in one of these workshops, in an inversion workshop, because she never did it as a child and she hadn't had her own children yet. And it was a very interesting experience for all of us. It was just both liberating and terrifying and all the stuff that comes up with it. And so now try to go backwards crawling. Again, depending on your space, you might be able to go back a lot. I'm going to have to keep coming forward in order to go back. Okay. All right. Now we're going to come to standing. I want you to just take a few steps around your place to orient yourself. Notice how you feel. Make sure you're not dizzy or lightheaded. All right. Like I said, if you need to take a break or just pause the video, do so. That should warm you up just a little bit, you know, muscle wise, but also mentally to move into this next place. If you need to do other warm-ups, please do. Pause again and warm yourself up. The key here, how to fall out of an inversion. Now, if you're in down dog, there's lots of inversions, right? So inversions is anything where the hip is above the heart. A lot of our inversions in asana practice, we don't need to worry about falling out of. I mean, and ideally, let's be honest, ideally, we don't need to worry about falling out of because we're not forcing ourselves into that next place. If the foundation is set both physically with our breath and mentally, the body feels safe, that next step, that edge widens a little bit and that next step can naturally arise. Okay. With this said, we are human and we like to push ourselves. Also students, hearing, communication, there's so many different variables that might not get that lesson and that recommendation across to everyone. So you will have people, especially as a teacher in group classes, moving beyond their edge. And no matter how much you try to prevent someone from falling, it's part of the practice, right? It's part of life. You fall, you get back up and you try again. Look at a kid trying to learn how to walk, right? They fall so much. Or if you've ever learned how to surf, I love surfing, is you fall way more than you stand up at the beginning, but you keep getting up and you keep getting up and you keep getting up. Okay. So how do we fall in a place where we try not to hurt ourselves? The big key here that I want you to take away from this is tuck the chin. Tuck the chin. Okay. So this isn't in any of the inversions that are, you're not likely going to fall out of. These are generally arm balancing inversions, right? And the key here is tuck the chin. There's one thing I want you to take away from this, tuck the chin. This is why. When we begin to move upside down, remember our eyesight, what we see is what guides us and guides us to safety a lot of times. Not all the times, but the general instinct of your body as it begins to fall out is to look where you're falling. Okay? It's built in us. So you're going to have to train yourself to not look where you're going to fall. Hopefully you've cleared the space around you so that you know if you fall in any direction, you're not going to, go through a fragile glass table. You're not going to crash into a statue. You're not going to crash into things that might potentially hurt you. Okay. Now I haven't done that, so I'm just going to clear my space now that I see that. Make it a little more safe. When you're in a group class and you're all like, I call it New York style practice, where literally your mats are right next to each other with no space. I'm not sure if I would go into inversion practice if I didn't know everyone's ability to move into an inversion. But you check your space, make sure it's clear. And again, if you begin to fall, your tendency at the beginning is going to be to look where you're falling. That's just natural instinct. But here's the thing. Generally, most of us fall behind ourselves, meaning like if I'm here, my legs are going to go that way. And if I look up and I fall like this is where the injuries happen. The neck is in full extension. And then if your body is going up and over, that can lead to some serious neck issues. So the key is you've already set your space. You know you can fall without hurting something else in the area. Tuck the chin, because when you tuck your chin, you're going to roll. Okay. So if you're not comfortable with forward rolls, that's where we need to start. Again, take off glasses. And it's almost like a child's pose, right? You're coming into child's pose. Tuck the chin. Oh, remove any ponytails that might be there. And practice rolling. Okay. Again, I'm not a gymnast. I'm not a gymnastic instructor. I don't know how to teach this more effectively because I've just been doing it for a long time. But tuck your chin in towards your heart. Try to bring as much of the back of the head on the floor before you roll. Okay. And that's how you generally are going to attempt if you're starting to fall out of an inversion. You're going to try to tuck and roll. Okay. Tuck and roll. So if you don't know how to do a forward fold, you might have to find someone in time and space to teach you how to do a tuck and roll or a forward roll. The other thing it might be helpful to keep in mind is that kind of like a shoulder roll. I was a volleyball player. I know I'm tiny, I'm short, but short people are really scrappy sometimes. So I was a defensive specialist and we learned to roll on the side. So you like go like this and pop up onto your feet as quickly as possible. You can explore trying those things as well, because sometimes when you fall, especially if you try to kick up with one leg, it's going to push your momentum off to the side. So being okay, kind of just doing a roll like that, again, not looking up, but keeping your chin tucked can help. And those are the same actions you're going to do when you begin to fall out of an inversion. Let me fix my hair here. So imagine we're coming into just a headstand, and I don't say just, that's a big accomplishment. And we're not near a wall, okay? Keep in mind, tuck the chin and roll. And this is what I would have you practice, is start with the tripod version. Okay, so establish your foundation. Grab opposite elbows where your elbows are. Okay, that's where your hands are gonna go. If I put my hands here, that's where my head's gonna go. So you're making an equilateral, or not necessarily perfectly equilateral, but you're making a triangle. Okay, and before I even go into headstand, I'm thinking, I'm not putting all the weight on my head anyway, right? There's so much weight in your hands. Okay, now naturally, if you're ready, your body will allow you to lift with ease. But if you're in a place where you're like this, first off, you don't ever need to kick up, and give yourself permission to not kick up and just build the strength here, really pressing into the floor, taking more and more weight off. But again, you might explore what it would feel like, because this is what your students will do if they kick up and they kick too far. Okay, so head back there, hands here. If they kick up too far, you want them to tuck and roll. Okay, again, the tendency is going to be for them to want to look up to see where they're falling. So if they're here, their tendency, if they're starting to fall that way, is to look up, and then they fall like this. Or worst case scenario, their legs would be above them and they'd fall like that, trying to look where they're falling. Okay, so we want to give the cue. Tuck the chin, tuck and roll, tuck and roll, tuck the chin and roll. So again, coming up, tuck and roll. And it just takes practice. You have to just do this a lot until your body gets used to, if I'm starting to come out of balance, tuck the chin and roll. You might try it on the side. It's not as comfortable, but it's usually happens just naturally. Like if you kick up one way, you're like, oh no, roll. Okay, I'll do that again so that you can see. Like, again, if I'm kicking up with one side like this, again, I'm not saying to, I don't want you to kick up, but if you see your students doing that and they kick up too far, it might push their weight off to the opposite side, right? It's just basic physics. And so if they do that, tuck the chin and roll. Hope you're having fun. But that's really what we want to encourage our students to do. Tuck the chin and roll. Tuck the chin and roll. Another thing about falling in inversions, to use the wall or not. I've seen some pretty, breathtaking as a teacher and as an assistant situations where the teacher had the student away from the wall, but close enough to the wall in case they need it. And what happens is there's enough space that there becomes a crunching against the wall, either handstand or forearm stand or headstand. And it's a recipe for potential injury. So as a teacher, I either have them really close to the wall, so the wall is right there to catch them immediately, or away from the wall so that they can roll, okay? My first teacher said, yep, go to the wall one time. You can only use it one time to get that like felt sense, and then not again, because they wanted me to develop the strength I needed away from the wall and the trust, because a lot of times it's the trust in ourselves and trust in our own inner strength and trust in our own will. And it's practice too, muscle memory. So again, either right near the wall so that the wall can catch you. Let's say we're going into handstand, right? Or I'll do forearm stand, because this is, I think, where you'll see the crunch up against the wall situation if you're far away. You're either right near the wall doing your forearm stand, right? Or you're far enough away, okay? Here's the other thing you want to be looking for in terms of inversions, and are your students ready? This will give you a good indication if they're going to fall or not. They need to be able to push away from the floor the entire time without collapsing into gravity. The entire time you're in an arm balancing inversion or forearm balancing inversion, you need to be pushing away from gravity. So if they don't have that mind-body connection and that they move into a new asana and their whole upper body collapses, they're going to fall. Just as something to look at for your students. They need to have that muscle awareness, that muscle memory in them to know that if I'm going into an inversion, I have to constantly press into the floor, press into the floor, press into the floor, press into the floor. And even if I'm in a place where I'm kind of exploring, I'm still pressing into the floor. I never let go, okay? This is the one especially where people are gonna look where they're gonna fall. And this is where neck injuries come. I've seen some pretty nasty, I've done them too, where I fall like this and my legs go up and over and you hear a bunch of cracking. It's terrifying sound in your head. Luckily, nothing ever happened. But I learned that if I'm gonna fall, right, I need to be able to tuck my chin, even if it means coming into a headstand for a moment, but I'm still pressing into the floor the whole time. I can't, it's really hard to get myself to go up and over because I've trained myself not to. Yeah, so same thing, even if handstand, oftentimes with handstand, you'll see someone go into a full wheel. If it's already in their practice, they'll naturally fall into a full wheel. That's one thing. If they're not used to going into wheel because they just haven't practiced that, tuck and roll. So let me see if I can do a tuck and roll here. So they're like, I'm trying this, tuck and roll. Okay, it just takes a lot of practice of remembering tuck the chin and roll. Okay, I've given you kind of a whole basket of things to consider as a teacher and in your own practice. If you have more questions, please feel free to email me. I think you all have my email. It's Haunani, Haunani at Indra Yoga, whatever the email is. Is it indrayogainstitute.com? Something like that. I'll make sure you have my email if you have any questions. But I hope you have a beautiful day. And thanks for playing with me.